I hope you did a good job evaluating those goals and objectives. I hope you understand the dead man's test. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So if a dead man can do it, it's not measurable, right? So my example in this last slide was saying that the student won't shut out in class, right? So a dead man obviously could be dead laying there. He wouldn't be shouting out in class. So we want to use an actual observable behavior. So if they won't we don't want them to shout out. We probably would prefer that they're raising their hand, right? That's an observable action. Another thing that I want to caution you about is not writing goals and objectives that you can't control. So, similar to this distance learning situation, you can't control what a student's doing at home. You also can't control if a student is doing their homework or not. So, far too often I come across goal objectives that are, Johnny will complete his homework 80% of the time. You have no control of that. You're not going home. You're not helping him at home. Homework is for home, right? Even handing in classwork. You can't control that he is handing in the classwork. You can control that you see it completed. Whether it gets to that teacher or not, you can't control that. You can make sure the systems are set up and you can measure those systems. So you can measure that you're seeing it completed in resource. You can see that it's completed at a certain time, but you can't make sure that he physically hands it to the teacher. Or you could say, with a minimum of one prompt, we'll hand it to the teacher. There's a better chance because that also ensures there is adult intervention. When it comes to homework, I frequently like to look at the steps leading up to success for homework at home, right? All of those organizational tasks you'd want the student to be able to complete before going home. So that the information is written and the students writing information in their agenda, that they have their materials organized, they have all the materials they need for a specific assignment, that they can explain the homework to you, those types of things. Whether they can find the information on the internet where they need to go to complete the assignment, that they've emailed something home to themselves, whatever those kinds of actions may be organizationally, those are the kind of things you can measure. But you can't measure, or you can measure it, but you can't have any impact on if a student actually completes a task at home. So remember, don't put things in the IEP that you do not have control over. A few other things is just make sure these are really person-centered. So things that are important to the student's success, meet them where they are. Far too often, sometimes I have parents who are saying, oh, but that's a very, babyish task, right? But that might be a task that's a real building block task we need to address before we move on. It's not that we're not going to give access to maybe that higher level task, but we need to make sure that we build those prerequisite skills as well. One other thing we want to think about is when a student is completing a goal, is trying to work through an objective. So assistive technology is something the state has really been pushing. How do we incorporate that into goals and objectives? So a good example of this is when I'm talking about a student completing a writing assignment. I may say, using voice dictation, Sam will compose or will complete his graphic organizer prior to writing, right? So I may incorporate that assistive technology if the student it has shown that they can be successful with it. I don't put it in a goal or objective until the student has already worked with that assistive technology and I know that it is a tool that works for the student. I'm not going to put it in if I'm just in a trial period. We always want to make sure we have baseline data. We talked about that a little bit before moving on, and that way we can certainly measure progress. As a special ed teacher, it's really important to have all goals and objectives listed in a very succinct way, a chart form for each student, being able to know every time that objective is being worked on and the progress that has been made on that attempt. I like to leave an area for notes as well, because sometimes maybe there's not progress that I can actually say, yes, they did accomplish this objective today, but maybe they're still making baby steps before I can actually give that check mark that there was one day of mastery. I think it's important that we're making sure that our data collection has fidelity. So sometimes we have para-educators who are completing that data. We want to make sure that we are explaining exactly what they're looking for. So all people who are taking data and implementing that instruction are on the same exact page. So lots of times this happens with students who are receiving really intensive ABA type instruction. More than one person is providing it, and we want to make sure that we are co-evaluating each other and making sure that we are watching each other once in a while give that instruction and take that data to make sure that we are both being accurate and considering something mastered or not mastered, and we're not giving too many prompts. Prompts are something that I find far too often get in the way of students' independence, and we like to say the student can do something or has mastered something, but they really are not independent in it. They require 3 prompts. They require the scaffolding. So, as you saw in one of my examples of goals and objectives, I actually put with 1 teacher prompt, right? So it's very important if we think that if the student is at a point where they are receiving, 10 prompts to initiate a task, if we want them to initiate a task and that's an objective, we can then say with 2 prompts, no more than 2 adult prompts, Sam will initiate the task and we can continue on with that objective. So we can look at what would be that trajectory. Some students are not going to get to 0 prompts, but we want to be clear in the objective about that. And we always want to revisit, is this IEP appropriate? So we can again go back to PBT anytime. If a student's not making any progress on certain goals and objectives, we can look at why and possibly meet as a team to see if we're in a good spot. So that's all. That's our very brief goal and objective review. The moral to the story is I want to be able to give my objective to any person in this world and they can implement it. So I don't want it fancy. I want it very basic. I want it to be directions, essentially. The student is going to this. I want to be able to visualize exactly what the student's going to be able to do so I can take data very clearly.